Hello everybody, and welcome back to the SAV Properties Podcast. My name is Caden Stanley, and I'm joined here by my co-host Melanie Eden. And today we're here to talk about to LLC or to not LLC. That's a large question that we get from a lot of investors, and really just what is it, right? What is the difference, and what are the advantages and disadvantages? So going into owning it in a personal name, in your own personal name, is the loan options side of things. So one of the options that is beneficial to owning it in your personal name is interest rates. Your interest rates are going to tend to be a little bit lower if you own it in your personal name compared to an LLC. And your availability, there's a lot of banks out there that just won't lend to an LLC. They want it in a personal name, and that's because you've got some assets and capital and things like that in your personal name versus an LLC that they can take less risk on, right? Because banks don't want to take on risk. And so the less that they have to take on and can leverage other of your assets against, that benefits them a little bit more. Another thing that is beneficial for banks and that makes it a little bit easier to you to lend on a personal side is the documentation that's required. Some banks will require a lot more documentation when it comes to an LLC type of loan, whether it's, we've had examples like they want land surveys, other documents that makes it a little bit more difficult to own an LLC. One of the other expenses that comes with running an LLC that you don't have owning your personal name is overhead expenses related to that LLC. Here in the state of Wisconsin, it's a $170 filing fee to start an LLC, and then you've got to pay another about $165 to get an EIN number, which is basically your own individual tax identification number for that LLC. So it's a little bit more overhead that you don't have to pay if you're owning it in your personal name. Kind of rolling into that, what are some other benefits that owning your personal name comes with?
You can do a 30-year fixed interest rate when you own the property in your personal name. The loan process, personal versus LLC, you can own up to 10 properties in your personal name with a 30-year fixed interest. Investors will pay a point to a point and a half higher on their loans than an owner-occupant will, because the bank says, hey, we're taking some more risk, so we're going to charge you a higher interest rate because the bottom line is we want to make more money.
Yeah.
Then when you move over to an LLC, you shrink the number of banks that are available to work with you, because you have to provide LLC documentation, you have to have a checking account set up in the name of the LLC, your insurance needs to be in the LLC, and you need 30% down. Sometimes you get lucky and it's 25% down, but the LLC requires a higher down payment and a shorter term. That's the real kicker with buying in an LLC. You can do a 3, 5, or 7-year ARM with an amortization of 20 or 30 years versus a 30-year fixed interest rate. So you're always refinancing your LLC loans every 3, 5, or 7 years. Not that you're not doing that when you own a 30-year fix, because as an investor, we are always paying attention to our interest rates.
But it's required one way and not required the other, which obviously if you've got a low interest rate and you're going in a personal name in 30 years, then you don't have to worry about it as much versus playing this game of,
That is true. Now there are some banks that will only give you a 1-year loan when you buy through an LLC. So a higher down payment, a 1-year term, and a shorter amortization schedule. So you're always running these refinance costs that you're not running when you have a 30-year fixed loan.
And I know when talking, LLC versus non-LLC, the biggest topic that gets brought up is personal liability. So when it comes to personal liability, having your personal name, there's obviously a lot more, and there's less when it comes to not having an LLC. What are some of the advantages of having it in an LLC in terms of liability standpoint?
Well, to be clear, the liability risk is the same, whether you own it in your personal name or you own it in an LLC. The advantage to own in the LLC is that you shift more of your risk to the insurance company when you own in an LLC. So I have a little bit of a story to share. I used to own a property. I sold it probably 3 or 4 years ago. And I got a letter from an attorney about a dog bite issue.
Oh boy.
At the property. So I follow up. First thing you do when you get any legal action in the mail, you submit it to your insurance company, because the second you know about it, you have to submit it to the insurance company, because you have a team of attorneys who's representing you through your LLC. So I submitted the documentation that I got from this attorney. Then my attorneys called their attorneys. So I can go about my daily life and I don't have to worry about what's going on with this dog bite issue that I don't have any knowledge of. So I get a phone call back from the attorney with my insurance company, and he says, "So did you know you had a pit bull at the property?" I said, "No, because we don't allow pit bulls at properties because the insurance companies ban certain breeds of dogs, and a pit bull is one of them." Well, apparently the tenant at the property, who had moved out 18 months ago before I get this letter, had her ex-husband over to visit, and he had a pit bull. And the pit bull, because it was a pit bull at large incident, and the pit bull got loose. And there was a dog bite that happened 4 blocks away from my house that I owned. But somehow they tracked it back to my house. And so I was subpoenaed to go in to meet with this attorney to talk about a dog bite issue from a tenant who is no longer my tenant anymore. They were divorced. By the time I was actually subpoenaed into court, 2.5 years had passed because there's a 3-year statute of limitations on that. And they asked me a couple questions. Do you know anything about the incident? No. Do you know this person? No. And then they show me a picture of the dog. Are you familiar with this dog? No. All right, you're dismissed. Now, had that happened to me personally, I would have had to have done that all on my own. The short answer to this story is that they were never paid anything. The insurance companies didn't pay it out. They litigated everything for me. And there was actually not a dog bite. What had happened is that the person was running away from the dog and she fell down. And the dog was nearby, and a person on a porch called the police because they were videoing everything, because that's what you do. We all have cell phones now. And the police came and they actually shot the dog. And the lady twisted her ankle, so she was suing me over a twisted ankle. And then the person that was on the porch that actually did the videotaping, he was also suing me for pain and suffering, mental pain and suffering. Thank goodness I had an LLC, and I had an attorney and an insurance company who actually did all of this work for me, so I only had to answer 3 questions.
Yeah, and that's huge because many people think, how much is it likely or how much is it really going to happen? But every person will look for any avenue that there is, especially when there's money, or an insurance company to get some money from, any opportunity. So it's a huge...
I have more stories if you want to hear them.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, there's always more stories.
So there was a Memorial Day party. I owned a duplex, which I have sold as well. And the upper tenant on the duplex was having a Memorial Day party. And so we come into work the Tuesday after Memorial Day, and there is this screaming message in our voicemail because someone had fallen off of the porch because they had had too many adult beverages at this Memorial Day party. And again, it took 3 years because I had to track down this person because she didn't have a regular address because she was a guest at this party. And she ended up getting $6,000 because even though she was drunk, fell off the porch, not my tenant, it was cheaper for the insurance company to pay her out and put an end to this
and go through
than to try to litigate and do blood samples from something that happened 3 years ago. I've had 2 or 3 other drunk incidents where guests of my tenants have fallen down steps, and the going rate to fall down steps is $6,000 because I've paid it out 3 times out of my insurance.
So there you go, something that you learn every day. That's the going rate. So, and that kind of transitions us into an LLC and kind of the LLC side of things versus a personal. So when you're saying LLC, just in case you're not aware, it's limited liability company, which most people say, it's just a company that has limited liability. But what does that really mean? And so one of the things is that we start with is how do you form one? In the state of Wisconsin, it's super simple. It's a 2-page form. You fill out your name, your address, who you want to be on the form. You pay $170 to get it filed. You create an EIN number. It's a super simple process. And they take care of it from there. You get it back, you create the name for your LLC, and then you kind of roll with things under that.
Can it be done online?
It can be done online. It can be done online or in person. I printed this out just so you can see, but it can be done online as well. You can mail in a check. You
What's
can actually
that
pay
website?
online as well. That's a great question. I know you have it memorized. That's why she's doing it.
WDFI.gov for the state of Wisconsin. That stands for Department of Financial Institutions.
Correct. And that's a whole nother discussion is what state is it best to file an LLC, which is a whole nother discussion because obviously there's a lot of controversy on that as well.
That isn't a question for someone's accountant.
I was going to say, yes.
Not for
Not
us.
us. As property managers and realtors, that's not our specialty. So what is one way, when talking about LLC, I know we're talking about avoiding personal liability, a little bit about that, but what is one downside switching from the liability aspect, but maybe a little bit in terms of transferring from one entity to another, transferring in and out of LLC, what comes to sales and things like that?
Are you talking costs or time or paperwork, which or all of that?
Maybe a little bit of all of it, but especially like the paperwork aspect of things and the steps that you have to take in order to be compliant, if that makes sense. I know it's kind of a blanket question.
Okay. I own a property in my personal name, all right? And the reason I bought the property in my personal name is because I got a better interest rate. I had a 30-year fixed interest rate, and we're going to pretend Donald Trump is still president. And the interest rate for an investor is 3.5%. There is no way, a snowball's chance in hell, that I'm going to refinance that property because the interest rate is too low. So what I then did is I did what's called a quit claim deed, QUIT. And I contacted my title company. I provided all of my LLC documentation to them, and they will fill out some paperwork for me that they will submit to the municipality. Rough cost on that, every title company is different, about $250 to file your quit claim deed. Now you have to be careful because if they submit that paperwork, now you're only submitting it to the municipality, you're not submitting it to your lender. So when you do your insurance, you have to operate as doing business as. So you have your personal name and then doing business as. That way they don't trigger the due on sale clause with your loan because they don't need to send anything over to your lender. They're not contacting your insurance agent. That way you can have your LLC set up, you can avoid your liability, and there's not a whole lot of paperwork you need to do. You need to sign about 3 forms with the title company. They submit it, cough up a check, and you're done.
And now you're kind of covered under this LLC that we kind of talked about and all the benefits of it. So I think it's a great thing. And do you have kind of anything else that you'd like to add, LLC versus personal property, ownership, transfer, paperwork, documentation?
The most important part of an LLC is it protects your personal liability. So as you become more and more successful in real estate, you are going to be looking for tax deductible ways to save money. So you're going to have money in an IRA. You're going to have money in a savings account because banks like to see significant assets. You're going to have money in a checking account. You're going to own your personal residence. You're going to own cars. What happens if you own a property that the tenants are responsible to shovel the snow in the winter and you own it in your personal name and someone doesn't shovel the snow and your neighbor slips and falls in front of your property? Well, if you own that property personally, all of your personal assets are subject to any type of lawsuit. But if you own it in an LLC, your insurance company steps in, you put a LLC wall up between all of my personal assets and all of my business assets, and the insurance companies get to duke it out. And then you can go on with your life and keep your stuff. Now, there are some attorneys, some accountants that think you need to have a separate LLC for every single property that you own, and you absolutely can do it. There's a lot of bookwork that you're going to need because you're going to have a bank account for each LLC. You're going to do a K-1 for each LLC. If you have a property manager, they're gonna have a separate portal for each LLC. You have to keep very good track of all of your bills.
And cost. You're doing this filing fee and EIN number fee every single time you do that.
Right. I have 3 LLCs. And I have a group of properties in one LLC, I have a group of properties in another LLC, and I have my financial planning business in a third LLC. Is it the right number? Seems to be so far, but there are going to be people that disagree with me. And that's okay. You can set up a separate one for every property and be right, and that's okay.
So there is really no wrong or right. It's just kind of whatever works for your individual portfolio, I guess.
Your risk tolerance. The higher the risk tolerance you have, you can play as buying everything individually all day long if you want to take that risk. I think buying real estate sometimes is big enough risk alone. For $250, why take it?
Yeah, agreed. One less thing that you have to worry about with all the other things that we are here to talk about as we come up in the future weeks.
That's right, Forrest Gump, one less thing.
Exactly. And so kind of looking forward into next week, I know we're going to try to cover recourse versus non-recourse loans, and we'll kind of talk a little about that as you tune in next Friday. So awesome. Appreciate you guys joining in, and we'll talk to you guys next Friday.